You are listening to the Move the Dirt podcast. The information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to provide medical, legal, or any other professional advice. You should always seek advice from an appropriately qualified and experienced professional.
Hello everyone. So today I'm joined by Heather Foley. Heather, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about the type of work that you do?
So I'm Heather. I'm very recently retired musculoskeletal physiotherapist. I retired in January. I worked with the military, the NHS and privately over the years. And now I'm teaching yoga, treat people with EFT, so emotional freedom technique, which is basically acupuncture, acupressure points on the body. And I also do meditation. I'm recently completed the Nutrition Network training for medical pathway with the Professor Tim Noakes Foundation. And I've also completed Dr. Georgia Eads' Ketogenic Diet for Mental Health training course, which was brilliant. And I'm also currently organising a clinic for October 4th and 5th at the end of the year.
Wonderful. So you mentioned that you're a retired physio.
Yes.
And that you've now moved into other things. Would you be happy to tell us a little bit about why you chose to move on from physiotherapy into other areas?
Yes, so I've got a condition called Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. So I've got arthritis in my right thumb, in my right elbow, and in where my collarbone meets my shoulders. So I was a very hands-on physio and I used to end up in a lot of pain. My right thumb is my working thumb. So I didn't enjoy the fact that I was on a hands-off approach, but I also am an obsessive researcher and I really am fascinated by the ketogenic diet and how it has benefited me over the years. So started looking into that in 2010 and that's become my passion, and physio has declined over the years relative to the pain and discomfort I was going through and the lack of ability to be able to help people from a hands-on approach.
Because you and I first met each other at the War on Health conference, Easter 2024.
Yes.
I remember that conference was a real eye-opener. And I think that you were one of the people that I gelled with particularly. And, you know, we talked a lot and you shared your experiences. And I found that absolutely fascinating. It was a real life-changing event for me. I had previously heard about the ketogenic diet, but to be honest, I didn't really understand what it was or how it worked. So would you like to perhaps explain to the listeners what the ketogenic diet is and why you're such a fan of it?
Yes, absolutely. So first off, it is not a fad loss diet. And I think that's the toughest thing for me, is the fact that people perceive it as a fad diet. It actually is probably the most researched diet out there, and it stems back from 1921 for helping with epilepsy, particularly for younger kids. Back then it was like 80 to 85, 90% fat and minimal protein and carbs. So it mimics fasting, which means your insulin is very low, and helped control epilepsy. So that's where it started from. Since then, as time has gone on, research has gone into other areas. So there's an awful lot of research in bipolar, for example, depression, lots of areas in mental health, Alzheimer's disease. So it's looking globally. Diabetes is another one. And ultimately what it comes down to is the link between excess sugar and not excess sugar, so to speak.
Right, okay.
So a ketogenic diet is any diet that lowers insulin enough that you're burning fat. So what we're looking for really is to get the sugar down as low as possible to make you more insulin sensitive. So you're utilizing your insulin efficiently rather than exhausting your body constantly utilizing insulin. So the average person would have 60 to 80% fat in their diet. And it's measured in ketones, millimoles. So nutritional ketosis would be 0.5 to 2.5 millimole. And that just works for anyone who's looking to lose weight. particularly unhappy in their body, depression, etc. But for therapeutic ketosis, which is more like cancer, epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, bipolar, concussions, which was my entry into the area, that is more therapeutic ketosis, which is 2.5 millimole to 5. But the big caveat there is higher is not always better. So you have to work out what the ideal measurements are for you. And there's a really easy way to check your insulin. So it has been said is via the glucose ketone index. It's called the GKI, and it was brought into space by Dr. Thomas Seyfried and his team. And essentially what you do is you check your glucose, blood glucose, and you check your blood ketones, and you get a ratio of the two. And that tells you where you are from an insulin sensitivity point. So ideally, if you are looking to help with cancer or epilepsy or concussions, etc., rheumatoid arthritis, any immune issues, you're looking for between 1 and 3 those points on this GKI score, so the index. And the higher you go, the less insulin sensitive you are. So some people, they don't need to have high levels of ketones at all. So they might be more on like kind of 7, 8, 9 on the scale, which means they're very low on the GKI. But that is something that I have used a lot because I find, and it was said to me actually on our group when we did our training by Dr. Georgia Eade, a lot of people spend their time in no man's land. They're neither in ketosis all the time or out of ketosis all the time. They kind of go in and out. So they're not getting the true reflection of the benefits of being on a
I
ketogenic
was
diet.
fascinated when we spoke previously that you mentioned to me the minimal amounts of sugar that we are supposed to have in our bloodstream at any one point. I was absolutely amazed that it was so little when you consider the foods that really make up quite I would say, a significant proportion of the Western diet, if I can use that term, is predominantly carbohydrates based, and yet we're supposed to have such a limited amount of sugar. Can you just remind me what the level was? And perhaps I think the listeners would find it very interesting as well.
So I think this is where the World Health Organization has it right. So women should have 6 teaspoons of sugar a day, and men should have 9 teaspoons of sugar a day, because it said that the body, there should only be 1 teaspoon of sugar in the bloodstream at any one time. And again, it said that 1.5 teaspoons of sugar around that level can be the equivalent of diabetes. So the body has to make sure, by bringing insulin in, to make sure no more glucose goes into the bloodstream. So I had a client years ago who was very keen to get her depression under control and was also overweight. And I had her write a food diary for me, and she was actually in the military. And she said she ate very, very healthy. And I thought, absolutely, let's have a see. So she wrote me this diary, and we worked out for breakfast. She had 36 teaspoons of sugar for her breakfast. And what that was, which I think is a huge shock, is she had muesli, which is perceived as healthy. She had banana on top of that. She had Greek yogurt with that and honey. And then she had a glass of orange juice. So in reality, the average person thinks that is a healthy breakfast. But that is such a massive spike in sugar that the body has to produce a lot of insulin to get rid of 35 teaspoons of sugar that cannot be put in the bloodstream.
So that particular client of yours has far exceeded her daily sugar quota just by having breakfast.
Just by having breakfast. Now, if she were to run a marathon, the chances are she'd burn a lot of that off. But most of us are very sedentary, so there's no way that will get burnt off. And then she's not giving her body enough time to rest and get her insulin to come back down before she's snacking, because she's hungry again because she's crashed. And this goes on all day, where we go from 3 meals a day to 3 meals plus 3 snacks, because the sugar will never keep you consistently ticking along.
And you mentioned, if I understood you correctly, that we should only have 1 teaspoon of sugar in our blood at any one time.
Yes,
How does the body deal with excess sugar? What happens? Because I'm assuming if we're only supposed to have the 1 teaspoon of sugar, the body will have some type of defense mechanism to eradicate excess sugar from the bloodstream. Would that be correct?
So basically, the pancreas releases insulin, and the job of insulin is to get glucose into the liver and into the muscles. And that's utilized for energy at a later stage. But also excess has to be put somewhere. So it's turned into fat. It's turned into inflammation in the joints. So it has to be pushed out wherever it can go so that the body is always safe.
Well, that's quite something, actually, to consider the amount of sugar that we are consuming. And I'm assuming that if it's just pushing the sugar out anywhere it can, this is possibly linked to why people are gaining weight if they're eating excess carbohydrates.
I think it's a definitive. I don't think it's a possibility. I think it's
That
absolute definite.
Wow. What led to your discovery of the ketogenic diet? I mean, I'm assuming that discovering this diet has changed your own life quite radically. I mean, what led to this sort of voyage of discovery?
So I've had a long history of traumas. I had 10 years of PTSD from 2002 to 2012. I had 10 concussions between the age of 15 and 35. I've had Bell's palsy twice, which is when half of your face gets paralyzed. I've had trigeminal neuralgia twice, which is when you're getting electric shocks on one side only of your face. I have PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome. I've had multiple surgeries. One included where I woke up in theatre while they were still doing surgery. So essentially, I've had an awful lot of stress. And one thing that I've learned recently through Ben Bickman, who's a professor in America, insulin is highly linked to stress. Like the primary causes of insulin resistance are linked to stress, inflammation, and too much insulin in the blood, which is called hyperinsulinemia. And if you think about all the stress I was dealing with constantly, actually was insulin resistant. But that was also confirmed to me years ago because someone told me that PCOS is treated with metformin. And metformin is a diabetic drug. So I was really surprised with that. So for me, I was always stressed. I was always reactive. I didn't cope very well in general. I started doing a lot of research and I found out about a gentleman called Dr. Michael Lewis in America who specializes in concussions. He used to be in the military and then he's come out and specializes in concussions. And he's very focused on omega-3. So I contacted him and he recommended his protocol, but he told me to have 27 omega-3 tablets a day for 2 weeks. And then after that, reduce by half until I came to about 2 to 4 omega-3 a day. Within the first 2 weeks, I calmed down an awful lot. I was really surprised at the difference it had on me. And then I heard about First Do No Harm, the movie with Meryl Streep. And it's about a young boy who has epilepsy and how the ketogenic diet actually, I believe, cured him. I don't think he's had an epileptic fit since. And when I read that or watched that, I then started to go down that rabbit hole of, well, if it can help with epilepsy, and it's all linked to the brain, then I wonder if it can help with concussions and PTSD, etc. So the more I researched, the more I realized that this way of eating was ideal for me. So I got into this way of eating around 2010, and I've pretty much stayed in this way of eating the whole time. I went from ketogenic, which is high fat, again, it's kind of 70 to 80% fat, 15% protein, and about 5% carbs. And then I moved across to the carnivore way of eating in May 2018.
Right.
I eat predominantly very high fat. So an average day now, I will have sardines with cod liver oil and cod livers, and I make that into a pate. And then I have either ribeyes, cheaper version is chuck eye, as Richard Smith told me, or fillet steaks. And that's all I have now.
Okay. And you said high fat. May I just clarify with you, we're not talking about any types of fats. We're talking about specific types. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So we're not sort of talking about oils and cooking oils when we say we're focusing on nutrient-dense fats.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. So the fats that I tend to eat throughout my ketogenic journey, I've had coconut oil, avocado oil, butter, ghee, tallow, and bone marrow. They would have been my fats of choice. And then like olive oil.
Olive oil as well. So, I mean, again, I found this absolutely fascinating because I've had a lifetime, I think like a lot of people, of being told not to eat saturated fat, not only because it makes you put weight on, but it will lead to ill health. But I am someone who very much likes to judge by what I see rather than what I'm told. And the thing that hit me hardest at the conference where you and I met was how healthy and how good every one of the speakers looked. And that was a real impact on me, because for the first time, were meeting people, and I know there was one particular speaker who I won't mention, but he is coming on to the podcast. But I remember that he had stated quite publicly that he was 60 years of age and had been accused of lying. And people were saying that, no, you're clearly about 40 years of age. And it got to the point where he had to show proper identification to prove that he actually was in his 60s. But it was a real impact, and it got me thinking that if this is how this collective of people are living, and they all look so healthy and so much younger than they actually are, there's clearly something not quite right with what we're being told we should be eating. So may I ask, Heather, in terms of your own sort of life experiences and your discovery of the ketogenic diet, what things have you done previously for your own health that you wouldn't recommend people do now? And likewise, what do you do now which you haven't done historically?
The first thing I think is very important is no two people are the same. And I think that's a really, really big thing, because we just assume if you can do it, I can do it. And if I don't achieve it, then I'm a failure. And in reality, nobody's a failure. They just haven't found what way works for them. Like Thomas Edison says, I haven't failed 10 times. I've just found what doesn't work. So it's the whole, you need to work out what works for you. So for example, I don't know if you know about abstainers and moderators.
No, not particularly.
So an abstainer is someone who really shouldn't have something because it brings out their addictive tendencies and it brings out negative sides to them. So a classic example is an alcoholic. An alcoholic cannot have that first sip. The most dangerous thing to have is that first sip. The sad thing is people don't realize that sugar and flour are highly addictive. So what they do is they say an alcoholic can't have alcohol, but a sugar addict, well, of course they can have a piece of chocolate. Just get your willpower, have some strength. Come on, you've got this. But you've just said that someone else can't drink because they're addicted to it. But yet the same reaction happens in the brain with the alcoholic and the person who's addicted to sugar. So, which is something that's going to be very big in the clinic I'm running in October, because the moderator, which is a lot of people, they can have, and I'll give a perfect example of this actually, they can have chocolate and have no problems having the chocolate and leave it. And my perfect example is when I was in uni, there was a girl that lived with me and she used to buy these massive blocks of chocolate and she'd have 1 square a day. And I found this absolutely fascinating. If anything, I found it incredibly frustrating. So on multiple occasions, I ate all of her chocolate, went to the shop, got another big bar of chocolate, took the squares away that she'd eaten and put it back in the fridge. So that is a classic example of she was a moderator and I was an absolute abstainer. Because as soon as I have that first piece, my brain just wants me to keep taking it.
I would say that's my character as well.
And it's I think a lot of people in our space realize it is their character too, but they keep thinking, and I've done this, absolutely. I keep thinking, I must be better now. I must retry and see if I can now master the art of having a piece of chocolate. And then I wonder why it failed miserably. And it's funny actually, or interesting, Dr. Georgia Eade speaks about the fact that she can always tell the addicts, the sugar addicts, that she treats because they disappear for 3 to 6 months, because it takes on average 3 to 6 months to get yourself back on track after you've cheated. And I think that's absolutely fascinating, because my biggest nemesis is chocolate and bulletproof coffee. And every time I've fallen off the wagon, it's because I've tried a piece of chocolate thinking, I'm going to master it this time. I'm going to have no problems. And before I know it, I've gone weeks to months of eating the same rubbish that I know is not benefiting me. I know it's having negative reactions to my body, but I'm justifying it to myself because my brain is telling me I need it.
Yes.
So I categorically know that I am an abstainer. And the day I finally get it into my head that I am never having it again, and that's actually a really good thing, is the day that I've finally sussed it out and I'm not giving myself excuses anymore.
Fantastic.
There's 2 other ones actually. Another one, and it's a big one. I've never done it myself, but I get very frustrated as a physio with this one, is running. And I have two examples with running. I had a client a few years ago and he said to me, which people say, and I think a lot of your audience will agree with this, I need to exercise more and eat less. And I remember when he said that because he wasn't eating enough calories anyway, and he was running 5K every day. And I said to him, at what stage are you going to stop eating completely and continue running? Because you can't keep this up. You're only in your 30s. And you think you're just going to eat less and less and less as the years go on and run more and more. And I actually spoke to him about fasting. And he took to fasting incredibly well. And as a result, he eats in a certain window every single day. And he's gained no weight whatsoever. And he just enjoys his run now rather than he's running to lose weight. Right. So I love that. But the other concern I have, and this is the physio side, is there are many people out there that are biomechanically not designed to be runners. And when I speak to them about running, they hate it, but they're doing it because they've been told that's the best way to lose weight. So not only are they stressing their body and their joints, and bearing in mind around 7 times your body weight goes through your hips and your knees when you're running through impact, you're also causing inflammation. And you're doing all this because somebody else can do it. But your body is not designed. I'm naturally a swimmer. I was a swimmer my whole life. I've got very broad shoulders and swimming is just, it's what comes easy to me. I'm not a runner. I'm not going to try and run. Whereas other people, they believe because everyone says running more will help you lose weight. But every time I ask, do you enjoy your running? Every time they say no. Because they're not meant to be a runner. They're either on the bike or walking on the beach or Zumba classes, you name it. It's just find what works for you. So this thing of this approach is the right approach. It's like, but is it the right approach for you?
I think that's a very valid point. We're not all the same. And that actually brings me back to something you said earlier that I wanted to delve into in more detail, if we may. As someone that has historically worked in a very high pressure job and someone that has constantly struggled with their weight, I was very interested when you said that there are direct links between having issues with your weight and experiencing stress. Can you talk a little bit about that and how the two are linked, and do you have any examples that you might be able to give to us?
Okay, so I do have a very good example, and I think I'm hoping it'll help give you the answer you're looking for, because I can use it on myself because I don't know enough information about your scenario. So from mid-February 2024 to mid-February 2025 was without a doubt the most consistently stressful year of my life, where it just I never seemed to get a handle on my life. And it started in mid-February when I flew home to be with my father, and after 5 days he passed away. And I was very close to my father. And then a few months later, my little dog got attacked and had to have surgery, which was a bit too much at the time for me after losing my father. And then I did a lot of firsts. I co-hosted my first conference, which meant I had to go on lots of interviews on podcasts. So I did my first podcast, and I could imagine people must have thought that the speed was twice what it was supposed to be, because I felt I was talking so fast because I was so nervous being out in the open. But I also ran Zoom calls, one weekly for the ketogenic diet and one occasionally for dry fasting. I also did my first presentation at a conference last year. And on top of all of that, I also, unfortunately, had to go through 3 court hearings with my ex, who owes me a very, very large sum of money. So as you can imagine, that's quite the stressful year.
Yes, absolutely.
And that took a huge toll on me. And what I realized very frustratingly is no matter how well I adhered to the ketogenic diet, I was gaining weight. And I didn't understand this. I got incredibly frustrated. And then early this year, I started using a continuous glucose monitor. And I realized that my glucose was always high, sitting between around 5 millimoles to 10 millimoles. And it would never really come down. And what I found really, really interesting was I had a narcissistic sociopath in my life. And that was actually confirmed to me in the last few weeks by 4 people, which was a huge relief, obviously, because now you realize the truth is coming out, which is nice for you, and it helps settle you. But the reason I tell you this is because within a few weeks of that narcissistic sociopath leaving my life, my glucose came down, my ketones went back up, and literally in the space of 3 to 4 weeks, I'd lost 4 inches around my waist.
Wow.
I was so shocked. I couldn't get over this extreme response. And that's when I realized that my stress levels were so high constantly, I wasn't able to self-regulate. My glucose was really high. My insulin was overworking because cortisol and adrenaline constantly up the glucose in your blood system. So insulin is constantly trying to bring it down. So you're having that stress, that inflammation, etc., etc. But also, much to my amazement, my desire for chocolate and bulletproof coffee, and bulletproof coffee is coffee with butter and MCT oil, and I personally put some salt in it. My desire for them completely left. Right. So I think that was a real shock to me. And what I'm trying to get at is you can be trying to get one area spot on, but there's other areas. There's a really good book called The Body Holds the Score by Bessel van Kolk, Kolk. And it just talks about the fact that you might think you're fine and you've dealt with the past, but it's still in here. So right. For me, it was explained to me because of all the stress I've gone through the years, I hold my stress at this kind of level, whereas most people hold it around their waist. So with the consistent stress in the last year, I wasn't managing well at all. So what I needed to do was to get my body, mind, and soul all linked. But I didn't realize that because I didn't realize the person that was in my life. Right. So when you start to see the bigger picture and you start to work out what is going on and what's happening, you start to realize there's so much more to the diet. And if you think about it, I wasn't having the standard diet. So if I was having 36 teaspoons of sugar for my breakfast and I was dealing with all of this stress, you can imagine it would have been a much, much more difficult outcome for me.
Yes, absolutely. So we're saying from that cortisol and adrenaline are having a direct effect on insulin production.
Yes, because basically what happens is when cortisol and adrenaline spike glucose in the blood. So what happens is the insulin has to get in there to get glucose out and pushed into the liver and the muscles and wherever else it needs to be stored to protect the blood, because the blood can only have 1 teaspoon of sugar in it at any one time.
So it sounds to me everything that you're saying is pointing at the fact that we need to keep control over our insulin production.
I definitely think a lot of us. So again, I spoke about him earlier, Dr. Ben Bickman is a professor in America. He's written a very good book. I think it's Why We Get Sick. And it's such a fascinating book, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone and everyone, because insulin is linked to everything, absolutely everything. And if you're insulin resistant, your body is really, really struggling. So I would imagine the vast majority of people that are listening to this are having issues with insulin.
Yes, absolutely. And when you're saying everything is linked to insulin, I've heard that some practitioners are now referring, I think it's Alzheimer's, they're now referring to it as type 3 diabetes.
That's right.
Okay. So it seems that effectively everything is pointing back. And you also mentioned the effect of the ketogenic diet on people suffering with cancer, which again is something I've looked at having lost my sister to cancer at quite a young age. I was also fascinated to learn that there certainly seems to be a consensus that your battle against the disease can certainly be assisted by having a low carbohydrate diet. And I think if people are interested, there's obviously Thomas Seyfried, I know, is sort of a leading practitioner in that area. I've also read a very interesting book from Dr. Nasha Winters as well, and also Andrew Scarborough has an incredible story, who was also one of the speakers at the conference where we met. Right. So it's absolutely fascinating how much impact it's having on our health. That takes me to my next point, actually, that I wanted to ask you about, if I may. Or certainly myself, throughout my lifetime, I've grown up in an environment where we have been constantly told we should be eating 3 meals a day. And I know certainly when I was young and sort of, playing sports quite consistently and training very hard, in certain environments, they would even say to us, you should be eating 6 times a day. And then I come to the conference, and I hear lots of people suddenly telling me that perhaps we shouldn't be eating 3 meals a day, and certainly not 6. And then I meet this lady very early on in the conference. I meet this lady called Heather Foley, and she mentioned something which literally blew me away, and that was dry fasting. Now, I had heard of fasting. I'd never heard of dry fasting. And you were very kind to spare me some time, and you explained the difference. So if you would, I would love you to talk more about fasting, what it does for the body, why it's recommended, and also if you could tell us the difference between fasting and dry fasting, and when you might adopt one rather than the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, it always gets that kind of response, like you said. So I started my water fasting journey in 2012. And at the end of the day, Bill, if you think about it, it's completely natural. And I know most of us have gone a full day without eating because we were so busy, and we just crashed out and went to bed. And then the next morning we woke up and went, wow, I didn't actually eat yesterday. But if you ask someone to fast for 24 hours, they'll tell you you're insane. But they've just proven that they've actually done it, but they haven't thought about it. So it's very natural. It's one of those things. Every single religion has fasting. You have to think about it this way. First off, it's only been the last few years that snacking has been included. And if you look at people in the 50s, 60s, etc., they were all slim, and maximum they had 3 meals a day. There was no such thing as snacking. So why is it that they were healthy and slim and yet we're not? We're getting heavier and we're getting worse and worse metabolic health issues. Again, it comes back to, I would have thought, the likes of insulin resistance, because like you said, we're constantly spiking and then we crash. So we have a snack and then we crash, and then we have a meal and then we crash. So there's no consistency there for the body. But when you're fasting, you give the digestive system a rest, but also you give the likes of insulin a rest. It doesn't have to fight, so to speak. And people say when you're fasting, you're starving and it's stressful, etc. But when you're fasting, it's your choice when you start the fast and when you finish it. So interesting, in the last year, I didn't succeed very well in any of the fasts that I tried to do because I was constantly stressed. And now it makes sense, but at the time it didn't. But I always say it to people, if you manage 6 hours through the day or 4 hours through the day where you have fasted, but you've never done that before, that's an achievement. So you don't have to go into a week of fasting like everyone insists on the internet. You have to focus on the more of what have you achieved in the past, how uncomfortable do you feel about it, and what is achievable in your eyes. So the typical one at the moment, I believe, is 18-6, where you go 18 hours fasting and you eat in a 6-hour window. I will also say the best people to follow are Dr. Jason Fung, who's a nephrologist, so he's kidney specialist, and he works a lot with diabetics and has amazing results. And Dr. Mindy Peltz, she's all about the women and supporting women. So very, very, very interesting. So they're two people. And of course, the third is Dr. Thomas Seifert. So yes, so they focus on trying to help you understand that not eating is actually beneficial to your body. And I do have an example. My father, when I was younger, he used to go to bed for like 2 days, not eat, not drink, nothing, and then get up right as rain. And I always found that fascinating because I had to have treats. I had to have all these snacks, and bless me, I wasn't well, but he was doing the right thing. Because it's let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. If you're not up for it, don't have it. And if you are up for it, then you'll naturally, hopefully, go for the right foods. So that was interesting. But also, I was a physio with golfers for a while, and you don't need to eat on the golf course. And there's this big thing that you have to bring food with you on the golf course, and they have snacks and everything. The only thing you need to do on the golf course is hydrate. Ideally, you should have 1.5 litres of water on the whole way around the course, because hydration is really important. And the likes of Steve Jobs and Richard Branson were very well known for fasting before big meetings, because you've got more clarity and you're more efficient. So there's lots of benefits to it. The difference between fasting and dry fasting. So fasting, you can have water fasting. So just have water with ideally electrolytes, because you don't want to be flushing out the electrolytes if you're not having any food. You can have broths. Some people fast with broths. Some people actually do fat fasts. That's the thing now. Some people do coffee fasts. There's so many different types, but you're taking in fluids essentially. But dry fasting, there's no fluids and there's no food. So nothing passes your lips.
So no water.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing, dry.
What's the benefit of a dry fast over a water fast?
So it is said that a 1 day dry fast is the equivalent of a 3 day water fast. And there's two people that are really big in this space that I recommend, and they're the only two people I recommend. It's Dr. Sergey Filanov from Russia, and he has a book on fasting. I think it's Q&As on fasting. And in that, he speaks about that. Michel Deladoy, who is European, I can't remember where from, but both of them have had many, many, many clients. There's a few other people in the dry fasting space that have never actually had clients, so I'm reluctant that people follow them. But these two have had many, many clients, and they do retreats in, like, for example, Montenegro. The results they get are phenomenal. So with dry fasting, if you're not taking fluids in, your body naturally has to protect itself and look after itself. So it gets internal fluids, so endogenous fluids from breathing, so oxygen, and releasing hydrogen from fat cells. So you will naturally pee all the time, but it means you're getting really clean water instead of potentially dead water, because as we know, there's a lot to be said for different types of water out there and what's actually good to be drinking. So that in itself is a clean form of water. Also, the body will go through and clear out any debris, anything that's not needed. So for example, tumors, cysts, ganglions, viruses, anything that is not a benefit to the body, it will get rid of it to keep itself going. So what you have is a decrease in inflammation, and you'll have it in both, but it's more so noted in dry fasting. You'll have weight loss, obviously, which will tend to, a certain amount will come back on. But in dry fasting, you have more weight loss because your body is utilizing your fat cells to keep you hydrated. You also get increased clarity on both, and it gives you that discipline that surprises you that you actually do have. So there are a few examples, but I would definitely say to go away and to look into Jason Fung and Mindy Peltz and Thomas Seyfried for fasting, and then Sergey Filanov and Michel Deladoy for the dry fasting, because there's so much information out there. I would say with the dry fasting, you need to be sensible. So you shouldn't be exercising hard, and you shouldn't be doing it in heat. You need to move regularly. So when I dry fast, I do 10 kilometers daily. As the dry fast goes, the maximum I've done is 8 days dry fasting. And as the dry fasting goes on, I found that I would break the 10K down into pieces. So I wasn't doing it all in a 1 hour, because you don't have as much energy as you did at the beginning. But for the first 3 days, it's relatively easy. I have found, and people that I have done Zoom groups with have found. So yes, exercise is very important. And also because a lot of people that dry fast, when they stay at home and they chill out and relax, they're in dead air. Like nothing's circulating. And this is why I always say you've got to walk, you've got to move, ideally in nature. And if you do more than a 2 or 3 day dry fast, ideally by the beach, because you're absorbing the mist from the sea. So yes, it's not dangerous if you're sensible.
Okay.
And I think that's really important, because I've done 3 7-day dry fasts and I've done an 8-day dry fast. And you have to listen to your body. You've got to be sensible. I started on a 3-day dry fast, but by then I'd already done 6 years of water fasting. So I was used to it. And the other thing is, on the ketogenic way of eating, you're more naturally in ketosis, which is similar to a fasted state. So it's much easier. Whereas if you have a high sugar diet, you will find it much harder to fast.
Okay. And if do you have any tips, Heather, for people that are looking to perhaps move from a standard westernized diet to a ketogenic diet? Are there any tips you might be able to give the listeners that might make it process slightly easier for them? For example, do you feel it's best just to sort of go at it quite hard and maybe fast for a couple of days to eradicate the sugar from the body, or are there other methods which you think are more advantageous?
I think that's an interesting question. Again, it's so subjective. Like I'm all in.
Yep.
Whereas other people, they have to be built up over weeks and months, and that works perfectly for them. So if I told someone who needs to slowly get used to something, and I say, right, go all in and do, like, shut down everything, they'll fail and they'll never come back. Whereas if you told me to do that, I'm more likely to go, yeah, I've got this. Whereas if you told me to do this week and this week and that week, I would get so bored I'd quit. So it's very, very individual. But one thing I would definitely say, as a piece of advice that I think is very, very important to people, is omega-3. And I've spoken about that already because I took so many omega capsules with Dr. Michael Lewis. So you have essential fatty acids, and two of them are, you've got a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, and the ratio should be 1 to 1 or up to 1 to 4. 4 to 1, sorry. So 6 to 3. And unfortunately nowadays it's anywhere from 16 to 1 to 30 to 1. And omega-6 is inflammatory and omega-3 is anti-inflammatory. So we're just getting more and more and more inflamed, and we're not getting the omega-3 in. And the main sources of omega-3 are, first off, algae, and then the fish eat the algae. So if you're vegan or vegetarian, algae is a very important source. And actually there's an O3 smoothies that sponsored us last year. They have lovely little sachets of omega-3, because omega-3 is really, really important for the brain.
Right.
It's highly linked to addictions. It's highly linked to depression, anger, rage, all these things. And interestingly, there are studies done, one particular in Japan, where they find it's got the highest rate of longevity. And the one difference to them in most areas is they eat fish every single day.
Right. Okay.
There was another study, and I cannot find it for the life of me. I have searched for it so many times over the last few years, and it was about islands. And they used their study was done on prisoners, which is an ideal study group because you actually can control everything. And they were given omega-3. And what they found was these prisoners started to calm down, they started to be less aggressive, and they started to be open to learning and open to education. Because if you think about it, and they're islands. So islands have the sea all around them, so they should naturally be eating fish.
Yes.
And interestingly, one of those islands was Ireland, where I'm from, which I thought was really fascinating, because actually we don't eat fish, and we haven't done in a long time. And I would highly recommend people look into omega-3, because all the seed oils we have, all the processed food we have, and everybody has to admit they have processed food, it's high in omega-6, but we don't look at the omega-3, and the omega-3 is what your brain desperately needs. So I would highly recommend. Dr. Sarah Pugh interviewed a gentleman called Dr. Michael Crawford, and he's got a book called The Shrinking Brain, but the interview is absolutely fantastic. Dr. Zoe Harcombe interviewed a gentleman called Dr. Guy Benzavi, ZVI. And again, when you listen to them, it makes so much sense. And I am aware, for me, I have to eat fish pretty much every day. So my choice of fish, personally, because I don't like farmed fish, I don't get on well because it's fed soy. Personally, I have sardines, and as I said, sardines with cod livers and cod liver oil as a pâté. And I think it's very, very important. If it was the only thing you changed, you would hopefully find that your brain starts to relax and calm down and not be as stressed, which will help you kind of be open to changing and looking at other things. Because sometimes we think it's a huge, huge challenge. And if you do not have a big enough why, then it's going to be hard to get through that challenge. If you have a big enough why, like you have cancer or bipolar, or even with myself, the concussions, and you're not coping in life, then you're more likely to go, I'm all in, I'm going to do it all. But when you start to realize how amazing you will feel because you're eating higher fat that your body knows how to utilize, because we've always had it. We've always had fish in the sea. We've always had algae in the sea, etc. So it's something that to me is very, very important. And it was what started my journey in this, Bill.
Fantastic. And your words there, Heather, if there's only one thing, leads me to the last question I have for you today. And that is, if you could give the listeners just one piece of advice, so they can only change one thing to change their lives, their health for the better, what would you advise them to do?
So I would have said omega-3,
Yeah.
definitely. But I think it's, so there's this big thing in our space called N=1. And it's basically where you are an experiment of yourself. And it's through trial and error you find out what works for you. So like I said earlier, for example, research can prove everything to favor you. And Richard Smith, and as I said, Anthony and I spoke about coffee and how we don't get on with it. But there's other people in our space that show the research how it benefits you. So you need to learn what's right for you. So you start with the basics. And if you realize you're not, like for me, people eat up to a block of butter in a day. I can't have butter. I get sinus issues if I have butter. I get swelling in my hands and joints if I have butter. But it turns out that butter is highly addictive for some people. Again, it's really, and I know it's a hard answer to hear because we want a quick fix, but I've been on this journey for 15 years now. I just want people to understand just because someone says it works for them does not mean it works for you. Please don't beat yourself up and think you're a failure because their way didn't work for you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks ever so much, Heather. It's been inspirational as always chatting to you. Can you tell the listeners if they're more interested in the work that you do, how can they find you? I also know that you are organising the Keto Conference this October, which I am planning to attend, and I can't wait. Can you tell us a little bit more about how people can find you and about the conference, please?
Yes, thank you. So the conference first it's not a conference actually, it's a clinic. So from the feedback from last year and speaking with a few people, I've always wanted to help the average person. I think it's really important that the average person gets a better understanding because all the conferences out there, the majority of the conferences out there are for the academic, they're for the doctor, they're for the likes of myself where I'm wanting to get the research and I'm wanting to help clients. But what I'm trying to achieve is get people to come where they have the research. So I've got 3 letters. So R is for reassure, and that's through science, through doctors, educating at a level that makes sense to you, which I think is very important because there's nothing worse than people talking at a conference and you're just looking at them smiling going, I have no idea what that person's saying. So that's the R for reassurance. The I is inspiration. So I'm going to have inspirational speakers like myself with concussions, like someone else with binge eating disorder, and autism, the results of being on this way of eating and how it impacts beneficially autism. And then the last one is education. And I think this is my favorite part of the whole thing because it's talking about all the mistakes people make. I have a speaker who's going to be talking about all the mistakes people make. And this person has been in the space for 25 years, so she's seen it all. So it's that whole thing of you kind of sit there going, Eureka, my goodness, my gosh. Those kind of comments where you leave going, I get it, I totally get it. But then hopefully we're also going to have links to like testing your ketones and knowing more about CGMs, how to make a simple recipe. And it's essentially just educating people to understand it's nowhere near as difficult as people make out. But because we sit and we watch talks that we know nothing about, we get flustered, we get frustrated, and we quit. And usually we quit way too soon before we've given it a real chance.
Yes.
So what I've chosen, like last year, it's going to be cabaret style setting. So there's going to be tables where people get to sit together, which builds community, which means you're not alone and you get to have lunch with people and sit and chat, because a lot of the time, if you are just in a row of seats, people won't intermingle as well. And I have had a few people over the years tell me that they've told nobody they're on this way of eating, except the Zoom groups they're on.
Yes.
So no family knows, no friends know. And that's really isolated. So if you were to come to the clinic, you will be like with like-minded people who probably have very similar story to you. And they just inspire you. They help keep you motivated. And like yourself, you meet people and you have that connection still to this day.
Absolutely. I'm still in touch with some people from the conference, and it was amazing to have that opportunity to mingle with people and talk to them, discuss some of the things and the ideas that the speakers had put to us.
Yeah.
So I'm so looking forward to coming along.
So it is, just before I forget, it is in Edinburgh at the Murrayfield International Rugby Grounds on the 4th and 5th of October. which the reason I've chosen that is because it's got ample parking, and they have got discounts for me for all the local hotels. And the tram goes from the trains and the airport, I've been told. So it's very accessible. At the end of the day, I've been on this journey for 15 years and I've made a heck of a lot of mistakes. And if I can bring people together to help you understand how you can prevent these mistakes happening, then I'm doing the kind of job I'm hoping to be achieving.
And is there a website or a social media where people can find more information?
The social media is Instagram, and it's at Keisha Brain Health. One thing about me is I'm quite the introvert, so I don't tend to post a lot, unfortunately, but I will get better at that. But that's the Instagram at Keisha Brain Health, and the website is currently being designed for me. We're planning on having it live by mid-May, and tickets will go on sale early bird on the 1st of June.
Fantastic.
And that will be www.keishabrainhealth.com.
Fantastic. By the time this podcast goes live, you'll probably have your website up, and I'll put a link in the description to the website. And how can people find out more about your day-to-day work, Heather?
It's very simple, www.heatherfoley.co.uk.
Fantastic.
Very simple.
Okay. Well, once again, Heather, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fantastic, and I'd love to have you back at some point to dive a little deeper into some of those issues that we spoke about today.
Absolutely. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for having me, Bill.
Thanks ever so much, and take care.
Thank you.